Hi, my name is CJ and this is my RC channel. In this video I am doing the build up on the center of wing section for the fresh 2-meter RES glider. This is definitely a very good kit and it is going to build up very easy, but you do need to take your time in certain sections. Number one, getting everything separated and organized, and I recommend sectioning the plans up unless you've got a really big work area, and even then, for example, I've cut these sections here that have the various images of the various sections of wood, plywood, and balsa in various thicknesses, and with all the parts and everything numbered. And that makes it kind of easier to figure out what's what and where things go. And placement is going to be very important. There's a lot of unique ribs in this buildup, and so you need to take your time and go through things carefully. They've done a really good job of making parts unique. If you recall, during the fuselage build, the various firewalls or bulkheads had a little hole drilled in them at the top, which indicated, up or forward direction for that part in case there, was confusion. And, I'm sure they understand that the vast majority of the globe doesn't speak German. And since the designers are German and have written their directions in German, they have gone through a good bit of effort to help non-German speaking people figure things out visually. For example, we've got several hybrid ribs, as they are referred to. In other words, it's a rib that is made out of balsa wood and plywood. So there's a center plywood section, and there's a outer front and rear balsa section, as you can see here. Now, if you notice, we've got a larger key here and a smaller one here. That not only shows you rear versus front, but it also shows you up versus down. And it helps you identify this rib uniquely as to its location, which is in the F9, A, B, and C location out here. It's the last full-size rib before you get to the outer rib where you've got your dihedral bend or dihedral angle. Another thing they've done to help you is things like these parts here. This is a tool, not a part, and these are your gauges for setting your dihedral angles on the outer ribs of the various wing sections, and there's several of them. The center section has 2 angled ribs, and then the outer wing has an angle here and an angle at the outermost section. And how they've done that to help you get these together is the 5-degree ones have a single hole, and so you can see the plank there, and then there's the number 5, so this is the 5-degree tool. So that just plugs in there like that, and you can glue these up. And if you'll notice, you'll see on the plans there's 5 degrees there, and down here we have 7 degrees, and again 7 degrees over here. So this is our 7-degree tool, and as you can see, this one has 2 holes and then 2 holes on these parts that plug into it. So you're not going to confuse which parts go with which one, and then which one is number 7 because they cut a 7 and a 5 in there. So that's all very convenient. Then you've got these nice jigs that will plug in over the ribs and hold the ribs to get you the proper spacing and keep them all vertical. Now that doesn't include the outermost ribs because those ribs need to be angled. So those are not included in, spacing is not given for them. And then you've got 2 more of those over here, excuse me. These two help you build your outer wing section. This is for the outermost and then for the midsection. So, other things to watch out for. Okay, now on the hybrid ribs, there's several hybrid ribs. You've got the one that I first showed you, and as you can see, you have the keys going out towards the rear and inward towards the front. Now, on the outer wing, you've also got hybrids, but they did those slightly different. They had all of the keys going outward, front and rear. So you can look on the plans and you can see, okay, this key is over, excuse me, it's on the plywood here, and the one with both keys, sets of keys facing out, are the A4Bs, and the ones with them facing in and out are the Fs. Now the Fs are all in the intersection, and the A's are all in the outer sections. And I'm sorry, I can't swing the camera over there for you, but because this one isn't fully labeled, it's a clone of this wing section over here. And as you can see, but those are all A's for the outer section. So you know this doesn't go to that rib over there. It goes over to these hybrid ribs here. I've just got these stacked up here for organization at the moment. So that makes building this a lot easier. But also when you're going through these ribs, be very careful, because the ribs that are going to support the spoiler here, they're almost all of them are different. In fact, they're not, none of them are the same. 1, 2, 3, and 4 are all different. For example, this one right here is shorter, and you can tell the balsa here between the hole and the top is thinner than it is here. That's because this one is going to have sheeting over it. You can also see that it's got a different tip, because again, sheeting is going to come from there over, whereas these are not going to have sheeting on top of them, these outer ones. So there's a difference right there. Then you have this one here. This one has a special notch in it, not only to handle the wood, but it's got an extra large notch to handle this little piece right here. Make sure you don't lose those and cut those out. They are on one of the pieces here. I'm not going to dig for that at the moment, but you can find it yourself. This piece keys in directly behind this piece of stock here, 4x4 mil stock, and basically it attaches here, and the hole is for one of these small magnets, and the magnets hold down the spoiler, keep it closed in flight. And so the servo will actuate and open it, but when it comes back down again, the magnets will hold it in place and keep it flush, so you've got a good aerodynamic wing surface. And then the outer one is even more different. It's got this little key slot in it, and that's for this wood section that is going to be like a base for the spoiler. So make sure you line all those up. These two right here, let's see, those are F7 and F8, are the only two ribs on the midsection of the wing that are identical. Otherwise, they are all different in some way or other. Another thing you want to make sure you're doing, and I haven't done these, is to make sure you sand off all the little bumps. I wanted to show you how these look. When you cut them off, even when you cut them close with a blade, you're going to end up with a little knob sticking up there, and you want to sand those smooth before you go and put the wing together. Otherwise, you got to try to do it when the wing is assembled, and that's a lot more difficult. So getting all of those done is important, because if you don't, you're going to have uneven surfaces when you do covering, and you definitely don't want that. So this is where the time comes in, is number one, separating your parts and organizing them and making sure you're keeping them in their right locations so that the wing is going to build up properly. Because if you start gluing things in without being positive, you're going to have issues. Now, another thing to do, you could just label each piece with a fine point Sharpie or something. But I'm going to be using a transparent covering. It's colored transparent. It's not clear, but you can definitely see through it. And I want to see just wood. I don't want to see, handwritten numbers. If they were, like laser etched onto the piece or something, I wouldn't mind that. But since there are no markings, you're kind of left to make a decision on your own. Do you want to mark the parts or just be very meticulous about organizing? And so what I've done is, with several of these sheets, I didn't do it with all of them, because some of the pieces I just, cut as I was, looking for the various numbers. And then some of them, for the outer sections, I've gone ahead and just numbered them up on the scrap wood section. So when I'm ready for each rib, as I'm cutting and laying out the outer ribs, I've got all of those. And likewise with these sections, I've done the same thing. And I've also labeled the sheets. So I just came up with my own convention for that. As you can see, this is sheet W2, and here's the W2 sheet. W3 sheet, and here is the W3 sheet. So I know where I'm getting the parts from, and I can match them up with their numbers if there's any point of confusion. So those are all ways to help you keep this organized and build. And the when you're building the outer sections, both of the outer sections taper. So every single rib, even the small partial ribs, are unique. There's a pair of them, one for the left side, one for the right side, and that's it. So you don't have any duplication of parts. So you have to be very careful about positioning, or you're going to have, a broken plane. You just can't recover that. If you glue the F12 rib in between the F8 and F7, you're going to have a leading edge that has a big, jog in it, and there's just no fixing that. You're broke. So you kind of got to, number one, be organized when you lay things up. And then when you've got things laid up, do it over the plans and make sure, visually you should be able to look down the leading edge of the outer wing sections and see a straight line across all of the rib tips and across the tails. And if there is no deviations, you've done everything correctly, and you can go ahead and glue. And that's the nice thing about the way this is designed, having this nice big carbon spar here. You lay up all the pieces, and the first thing you're going to want to start with is, when you're doing the center section, is the center 4 ribs. There are 2 balsa and 2 ply, and the 2 balsas are sandwiched together by the 2 plies. And this provides the certain, this is where you're going to be drilling through to get the center of the wing. I am still going to be doing the drill from below. If you follow the plans that are available, and they are very, very thin, there's a lot that is uncovered in them, in my opinion. But again, it's there's a lot lost in translation, I'm sure. You want to get the middle of the spar. You're going to end up trimming the outer edges, but you put this onto the spar in the center, and then use a triangle or T-square or other precise measuring device to make sure that you have a 90-degree angle, that this is not offline. And you don't need to worry about the tail. I wouldn't do it on the plans. I would just set it down wherever you want and get a triangle on that and make sure that this is at a 90-degree angle. That's the number one thing to making sure that you've got your wing centered. Now, you could still drill a little bit off one side or the other with this and still end up with a wing that is off angle to the fuselage. So I'm definitely going to proceed with the way I'm doing, with drilling the initial pilot holes from below through the blind nuts in the fuselage with the fuselage lined up to the wing, versus just trusting that even though I have this at a 90-degree angle, even a half a degree of variance here, or from the hole not being perfectly centered or something, is going to manifest in a big difference with a 2-meter wing as far as, you know, rotation goes. You know, if you're talking a wing that's this big, a half a degree isn't very much. When you're talking 2 meters of wingspan, that angle diverges the further out you go and becomes a much bigger issue. So you really want this to be precise. So you may want to follow the way I'm doing the holes. In any event, all this will, you know, I'll demonstrate this as I go. So again, the first thing I'm going to be doing is getting these on here, getting them centered. I'll probably laminate them first. I may wait until they're on the wing, get them clamped together, get them at a 90, and then just drop fast CA, thin CA, which is going to wick right in and glue everything together. And you know, there's certain areas where, and they even say so in the plans, don't be, you know, shy with the glue when you're gluing these ribs to the carbon spar. One nice thing about carbon is it absorbs thin CA very quickly. So, you know, you don't want to go overboard. You know, it's kind of a fine line. My experience is that you know, if you put a few drops of a few drops of fast CA on carbon fiber, it can wick a good distance up. So, you know, use your best judgment. And I'm probably going to start by using a minimum amount of glue on each spar while I'm jigging everything up, getting the leading edge attached, getting the tail section, the trailing edge attached, excuse me, not tail section. And once I've got it built and I can like pick it up and hold it, then I'll go back and, you know, glue each one a little bit better, you know, do a second gluing, as it were. But I'm just going to tack them at first. I'm not worried about wasting glue. I'm worried about adding weight unnecessarily and oversaturating the carbon with CA for no good reason. So, let's see, is there any other things I wanted to tell you about this? I think I've basically covered all the little pitfalls that I've come across so far, things you want to watch out for. There's some neat things about this kit. For example, these outer ribs and the hybrid rib, you have one solid ply and one hybrid. And the main reason for that is a strength at this joint right here. There's this extra hole here. These are for magnets. There's the teeny magnets, comes with 2 different types of magnets. A set of them are very small, and they are to put in these little holes here and again on the spoiler above, so that those things click together. But as a means of retaining the wing, you've got the carbon pieces that are going to go through here for the dihedral. You've got these 2 pins here and here, and then you've got a magnet on either side built into the rib that's going to click the ribs together and hold the wings together. I am probably still going to use tape because if there is any gap at all, it's a huge aerodynamic penalty. So using wing tape is a good idea as well, in addition to the magnets, to make sure the wings are held together. But mainly the tape in this case is going to be for aerodynamics, because from what I have been told by professional glider pilots and other engineers, that little gap in the wing, even if it's just a hair, can have a really detrimental effect. So smoothing out the wing joint surfaces with wing tape is something that you definitely should do for every flight. So, anything else? Nope, not at this time. Okay, so again, I'm going to go ahead and I may start gluing these together a little bit, at least tack them. I don't want to glue them too much before sliding them onto the rib, onto the spar, because I don't want these, I don't want to get this hole contaminated with too much glue and then have it not slide on easily. I could always sand it a little bit afterwards, but I want it to be as snug as possible. So, you know what, since getting that 90-degree angle is the most critical, if I start laminating these ahead of time and they are off even a little bit, that 90-degree angle may be harder to achieve. So I'm going to just slide them in loose. Once they're on, I'll measure up the 90, I'll clamp them together, and then I'll glue. So that's probably what I'm going to do. In fact, I would say that's definitely what I'm going to do. Okay, so there is enough overhang at either side so that you've got, a 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch of extra carbon fiber tube on either side. So you just need to get the approximate center. I eyeballed that up, put a little piece of tape on here just to get these in place, slid these on. So these are approximately centered. And so now I'm going to lay down a little sheet of plastic here. I'm going to use this new triangle I purchased. And the nice thing about this is that it's got these outer edges. So I'm going to be able to place that just like that against the side. Lock that into place. So there's my solid 90. And then I can drip a little bit of glue on either side. I'm going to go ahead and pull the tape off before I glue. So let me get a little sheet of plastic to lay down here. Or I can just move over and do that over this section where I've already got plastic. So these are quite snug, as you can see. It's you know, it was a little work to slide them on. Nothing not like hard work. It's just, you know, I had to use a little force. They're not loose is where I'm going. They're snug. So I know where the center is. They're not going to move away from center of any, you know. So I can pull that tape, get that out of the way so that doesn't become a permanent resident. Okay. So now I can make sure that I'm, you know, these are not askew from each other, you know, like this. And I can start doing a little clamping. Okay, so now opening a new tube of CA. I've been leaning towards Zap lately. You know, one CA is much as good as another. This is what my local hobby store carries, and I do try to shop at my local hobby store as much as I can and keep them going. So again, right now I'm not trying to laminate all the parts. I'm just trying to glue the ribs at a 90-degree angle. So normally I don't show you the gluing processes on things, but I'm going to go ahead and show you on this. And that was actually a good bit of glue. I don't want to make that a permanent resident. The glue really just wicks right in and disappears. So now I can just tack a few spots here. I don't want to get too close to my clamps. Don't want them to become residents either. I'll do a more thorough job of this once things are dried and anchored. As you can see, I put a little too much there and it wicked right back toward the rear there. And see, one of these little rubber feet got. There we go. I should have just cut this loop off in advance. Once it's, you know, it's just on there to bring this along for the ride. And once you've got it on top, just cut them off. It's useless and gets in the way. So you're now solidly anchored, and yeah, you see that glue just wicks right on down the line. It just follows gravity. There was glue out to here from those few drops I put in over on the side here that just seemed to disappear. They went right around and started following the carbon fiber. So yeah, see, you can see that the CA has wicked in all the way down here. This is a very critical part, so I don't mind being a little heavy on the glue. But that should do it. Maybe a little more on, this is where the holes go through, here and here. So making sure that's solidly saturated is good. Okay, so this is the beginning. I'm going to let this dry so there's no sticky spots, and then I'll start laying this up. Now, what I'm going to do there, pardon me while I move the camera, basically you just take the pieces one at a time, slide them on in the proper order, get them roughly positioned, and then once they're all on, with the exception of the two outer ones, which is the solid and the big hybrid, this one stays off to the side for now because that gets done later without the jig. So this one I'll glue together first, you know, and likewise the one at the other side. Go ahead and get these joined up. Just set it down on a piece of plastic and do some thin CA on it. Then all these pieces get put onto the spar, and then lay it on top of the plans. Use the jigs to line everything up. Pin the tail piece, the trailing edge and the leading edge in place as well, and then hit all the spots with some CA. And I'm not gonna bore you by showing you that, but I will drop in a step at a time, you know, as I've, you know, once I've got the pieces on, then I'll show you the jigging, then I'll show you the, you know, the various steps. I'm not going to show you gluing every spar. That would be horribly boring and make for a very long video. So on to the next step. Next step is me gluing these hybrid ribs, and I'm gonna go ahead and glue these hybrid ribs as well, have them ready to go. I'm not gonna laminate them together yet. I'm gonna leave that to the part where I'm actually doing the dihedral angles for that. Okay, so I've got one side of the center jigged up, and there's probably multiple ways you can do this. What I found to be the easiest way was get the first rib or two. So this one is a toughie because it's so thin. I'm gonna have to glue this and pause up for a second. Okay, I repaired that rib, slid it down, got the first short rib in here, and so what you want to do is get the first couple so that you've got this jig here firmly against the center rib, and then just take each rib after that one at a time. Slide them down, and you notice how I've got it like at a clock. I've got it at like 7 o'clock here maybe. So you get it in line with the jig and then rotate it up into the jig. Okay, now you don't need this to be perfect, because you'll have to, you're going to do some more alignment along the way, but this helps you get everything onto the spar here. And don't worry about the angle precisely, because once you lay this flat, all of these things will align for you with the flat surface of your table. I'll demonstrate that in a second or two here. So you see these are not all aligned to horizontal, but once you place this down, you can align them all nice and easy. You see? So this is definitely the easiest way. Once you get this started with the jig, just take one after another, and that's why having them laid out on the table the way I did is such a good thing to do, because you just pick them right up in order. You don't have to worry that you're doing something wrong or getting them out of sequence. Just remember to put a short rib in between each of the full-size ribs. There we go. And everything fits in nice and snug. I could probably loosen these up a little with a little bit of sandpaper, but I'd rather them be a little tight than have them be loose. Because if they're tight, that means you're going to get a really good gluing surface. Solid contact with the carbon, and the thin CA wicking into the wood and the carbon is just going to make for... Oh, I'm missing one. I already did a short one while I'm talking here. That's going to give you the best outcome. And it just gets easier as you go. And this is the part probably where that person commented that you could almost build this sitting on your couch. Now, making sure these are at the right angle, you know, that kind of thing will be adjusted when you're pinning things down onto the plans. But it is a thing of beauty. Really love this kit. I could easily see myself buying another one of these at some point, making a powered version. I've debated making a just designing my own fuselage based on the dimensions of the existing one. I could even use the firewall that was provided with this one. So I would already have a motor mount drilled out for the fuselage that I would build. And then being able to use this wing for powered or gliding as I chose. But I might just buy a second one. So let me move these blocks out of the way because I don't need them yet. Okay, so now as you can see, you can just push everything into position. And again, I'm going to be pinning everything down, and weighting it down. And so everything will be lined up properly. When you're using these jigs, it's best to use it like down like this. If you just have it straight up and down, all you're getting is a spacing. Okay, so in other words, if you put it like this, yeah, they're equally spaced. If you lay it down, you get spacing, and you also get a perpendicular alignment. So perfect. So I'm gonna pin this in place. I'm gonna get out the leading edge, and then I'm gonna start gluing. Okay, more tricky stuff that isn't really covered in great detail. Okay, there are 3 pieces of carbon tube for leading edge. There are 2 different diameters. And these 2 are the same. I'm going to show you the difference here. You should be able to tell just by looking that this one is bigger. And I'm going to try to get the ends into view here with focus, hopefully. So you should be able to see that one is bigger than the other. We got any focus going? Okay. So the thick piece is the leading edge for the center section, and there's a lot of extra that you're going to cut off. So, you know, just how I would do it, or how I am going to do it, I'm going to leave a small amount extra off one side, and I'm going to leave the rest of this over here and trim that just so I've got some spare tubing for later if I need it for something. The short piece of the 2 that are the thinner size are going to be used for your outer wingtips, and as you can see, there's more than enough for 2 of those with 3.5 inches of scrap. And then this piece will be used for the inner outer sections. And again, as you can see, this has at least 7 inches of scrap as well. So that just shows you which ones you need and for where, because it is confusing that none of them are the right size. Nothing is pre-cut, and that's just fine. I mean, you know, the longest ones are a standard size, and the other piece is probably a half of one of them, so that they just give you the full length to work with. So now other things to go here. I wanted to show you something. You see how I've got this tip up here, the trailing edge? You can, if you push down the front, you're lifting the rear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor the big ribs down. I'm going to attach the ribs to the trailing edge first. And you also may notice that over here, that this actually is a little longer than the plans. A lot of times when you see printed plans, you'll notice that, you'll notice that these are a little longer over here. This piece is cut a little large. You can see the extra spacing here on the lines. Sometimes it's just the way the plans are drawn. They're, you know, I rarely find a kit where the plans are perfect to the parts. But what I've done is at the other end, I made sure to have the same amount of extra. So in other words, I've centered this trailing edge against the plan. So I'm using the center rib location and the front to rear lines, and then everything else I'm taking as variable. So the center of this piece is lined up with the center rib properly, and that way the wing is going to build out equally left to right, because the jigs are doing what they do. So as you can see, these two inner ribs, there's a piece here that I have not been able to find, and since I don't read German, I'm not sure what they were doing here. It may have been something they just decided wasn't needed, or this may be referring to sheeting. Again, I think that's sheeting. They're talking top sheet. So the top sheet is going to overhang this rib a little. What it looks like the way it's drawn, that there's two partial ribs that are like doublers here and here. And you see F28, F27. Those must be those scrap wood sections for the, here we go. See, F27, that's the scrap balsa. I don't know why they put an F28 as well, because they don't have an F28 here. But that is going to be taking that scrap balsa and sheeting this section. So why they show it that way on the plan, and I find it very confusing, because I spent a good hour looking over every piece again and again and again trying to find an F28 and scratching my head, and I probably didn't spend an hour at it, but I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out late last night, and what was I missing, and what were they intending, what was their plan, and just couldn't get it, couldn't figure it out. And I saw F27 there and 1 mil, and it just clicked. You know, it's nothing like a night's sleep and a fresh mind. But yeah, that's that scrap. So anyway, so that's non-issue. So again, I'm gonna glue the rear of the ribs down. First, I'm gonna get this oriented properly, pinned in place, weight these guys down. I'm not going to glue the ribs to the spar yet. That'll probably be the very last thing that I do, because some of these, you know, I want to center, you know, they're a little cockeyed, and I want to make sure everything is straight. And since this is the most critical, that's going to be the last thing that I do. So once these are lined up to the plans, everything is centered, everything's going out from there perpendicular, these are tied down. I don't want any of these ribs to be askew from each other. So what I'm going to do is, once these are anchored down here, that means that all of my full ribs are aligned to each other. okay? Then I may just put a teeny tack of glue on each one of those on the spar, just to keep them from moving at all. Then I'm going to put on the leading edge, pin it in place, and glue that, thus making the relationship between the half ribs equal to the relationship of this main spar and the leading edge, so that there's nothing is off angle all the way down. So rear, front, and then main spar will be the gluing order. So this will get pinned in place, not these pieces here. I'm just going to set them aside. I keep wanting to knock them off the edge there. So again, I'm going to get this assembly centered up on this tail section here. I've already got this pinned down, as you can see. One of the things I like to do with pins, this is just in the area of technique for you guys. Many of you, this is, not something you need to know, but some of you who are newer to the hobby, when I do pins, I usually do them at about a 45-degree angle. And depending on what I'm trying to pin and how, sometimes I'm just trying to orient things forward to back, but especially in this case, I want this to be laid out perfectly flat to the table. And with between the paper and the plastic protector, this thin piece of ply could get some wave in it. So I not only do them at a 45, but I put the pin, the T facing down, so that the main shaft of the pin keeps it from moving, and the tip of the pin locks it down. So as you can see on these, they're all like that. And that just helps keep the item firmly in place. Just food for thought. So, let me get those batteries to wait everything out, or I may just pin them down. I'll decide that as I'm setting this up. Sorry about the wind turbine in the back there. Just a fan trying to keep this room cool. Okay, I wanted to show you a few things that I'm doing to make sure the wing is completely square. Now, all of these pieces are notched, so you want the trailing edge to fit into the rear of the ribs and be nice and snug, everything be straight. So first thing I did after gluing this down, pinning the trailing edge down, which I talked about a minute ago, was pin the center ribs perpendicular along the line of the plans. So that's what these two pins here and these are for. And then these forward pins here hold it firmly against the rear. I also took the plywood outer rib, not the hybrid, and this is not getting glued in right now. This is just for placement. You see these two pins here, these are holding the wing spar firmly back, with this braced against the edge where it glues into place. So that way we've got the center ribs firmly locked, and the outer rib, the plywood rib, which is the sturdy piece, fully blocked. Now, if I had done that with balsa is soft and it's a very small notch, so that could have gotten misshapen and not been as accurate. This is identical to this, so those two ribs provide an outer square, assuming that this piece is at least cut equally and is itself square. Everything should be good. So by pinning this back, that lets these ribs drop into their correct notches and be nice and solid. So now I'm going to just, instead of putting weights on there, because everything is held down firmly at this point, I don't think that's necessary, I'm going to put a pin basically next to each one of these. Sorry, I'm just trying to get my hands on one. And so I'll just pin them in place like so. just to hold that down against the edge here, because that's all I'm concerned about, is getting these squared and attached. So these will get glued, and then I move on to the leading edge while everything is pinned down, and then I can glue the spar. Now you'll notice that some of these items are not in line with the plans. Just a moment. You can see that this is almost a rib width over by the time we get out there. That's not a problem. I am counting on their jig to be the precise thing, not the plan. The plan is a drawing and a print that may not be as accurate. The jig is a CNC cut piece of wood that was cut along with all the other pieces. That's what I'm trusting, not the plans. I'm using the plan as a guide, not as a guarantee. So as you can see, they're also offline as we go out here. What counts is that this notch mates up to the notch in the rib. What counts is that the spacing is aligned by this jig and is correct. So that's what I'm going with. That's what I'm trusting. And you'll come across this a lot. This is something that I've seen in many, many kits, is the drawings are good, they're a guide, but you can't count on them for full placement and precision. Sometimes you've kind of got to trust them. You don't always have a modeler that, you know, a designer that gives you jigs like this that help you align things, and you have to kind of go with the plans or kind of go with your feel on certain things, or at least whatever the parts allow for from the way they're cut. For example, you know, this trailing edge here being a little longer than the plans. Well, okay, it's longer. How do you deal with that? Center it. Have an equal amount of extra length to either left or right, and you can't go wrong there. So I'm gonna glue those down and come back in a moment when I'm setting up the leading edge. Time for the leading edge. Just want to get some close-in views here for you. What I've done is I've got everything anchored solidly now. As this has kind of progressed, the wing is down nice and flush and tight, and I've got the leading edge in place now. Again, no glue on these outer two ribs. These are going to get angled for dihedral later. Right now I'm doing everything else. So to get this leading edge glued in place correctly, I have these pins here, and they're at a slight angle. They're down, but when I inserted them, I started by putting them at an angle about like this, and then once I penetrated about 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch into the foam, I started pulling back on the pin to make the tip dive into a more straight position, putting maximum pressure against the carbon rod here, pushing it into this groove so that it is seated properly. And this is just a great kit. I really love it. Everything is very, very precise. As you can see, having lined up the rear edges of the ribs, the notches, notch to notch, properly, and gotten everything angled correctly. Not only the vertical angles on these, but there's no distance between any of these. That's something you don't always see in a kit. The CNCing is very precise, the design is very precise, and it takes very little pressure to hold the carbon fiber rod fully and completely into the cutaways on every single rib. There's no rib that is a little back from the edge or pushing a little further out and needed to be handled or trimmed or ground. It's perfect. Everything just lines up. There's, you know, a minimum amount of pressure being put in by these pins. It's just enough to hold the rod firmly against the rib ends. And so now I'm going to go and hit each of these with a small drop of thin CA, and then I can go and do the primary, the main rib spar, excuse me, the main wing spar. And because this is still not glued, the only place the main spar is glued is to this central laminated ribs here in the middle. So everything is coming along real well. I'm sure the rest of the wing is going to go together equally smoothly. So I'm going to go ahead and glue these, and then I'm going to pull the jigs out of the way, and I'm going to go ahead and glue the center spar. Okay, I wanted to do an up close on one of these just to show you how just a teeny drop right here at the corner where they meet, and you can watch the glue just wick right around both sides. It just goes 360. It just flows into that nice joint where they are, you know, that's the advantage of having these pieces be firm versus loose, because that tight connection is like a magnet to CA. The CA just wicks right in. And it just takes a little drop. You don't need to do it on both sides. You just do it on one side, and it flows all the way through and around that connection.